All right.
Okay, hello, everyone. You are at a meeting of the NIPAN Single Payer Committee. I think I recognize most of the people, but in case anyone is new tonight, NIPAN is a statewide organization of grassroots groups working to elect progressive candidates and pass progressive legislation. And one of the biggest, in fact, the top legislative priorities for NIPAN statewide for the past few years has been passing the New York Health Act, which is New York's single payer healthcare bill that has been around for a long time, but has picked up a lot of steam in the last 6, 7 years, and we're hoping can get passed sometime soon. And tonight we are going to be talking about two things primarily. One is a pledge that one of the steering committee members, Rebecca, has put together that we can distribute to um, candidates across the state who are running for state office, for assembly, for Senate, asking them to pledge to support the New York Health Act and do everything they can to get it passed. We have a lot of people on this bill and have had a lot of people on this bill for many years who are, nominally in support of it, or maybe even are co-sponsors of the bill, but whose support is very soft. So one of the tools that we use to put these candidates on record, ideally even before they get elected, because then they have a record to live up, or some promises to live up to. We try to get them on record in support of the bill. And like I said, going beyond that to being a true champion on the bill. And that's the purpose of the pledge. But that said, maybe I'll hand it over to Rebecca briefly. Maybe you can explain your thinking behind putting together the pledge that you did a little bit and explain what it is and how we intend it to work.
Sure. I assume everyone's read it, so we don't need to take time for that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Um, so, as you know, I'm new to this group, but one of the things that I felt was important is that there be a written document where the language was very clear and accessible and inviting, that really forced people to take a very strong stance and not just give lip service. And so the pledge, as it is written, talks about being faithful to the needs of the constituents, and that perhaps there's nothing more urgent or important to constituents than well-being, and certainly health is at the top of what we consider to be important to well-being, and therefore that they will, by signing the pledge, not only promise to support it, but to educate their constituents about the bill itself, as well as the financial viability of it. And so I've been thinking about, I'm new to local politics. I've been involved in national politics since I was Adlai Stevenson's chairperson in fourth grade. So, and always worked on, well, many campaigns, but I'm new to local politics. And one of the things that I've been most struck by in my initiation is how many people have never heard of the New York Health Act. I have been asking all sorts of people, and I have a monthly poetry salon. These are educated women. They're liberal, progressive women. None of them have heard of it. I haven't actually asked one person who has. And so it seemed to me that the pledge was not only a vehicle for getting legislators to really declare their intent in a very strong language, but also perhaps a vehicle by which we could start educating, use it to at gatherings to educate people about this. I really believe strongly that having a statewide campaign where we would have home meetings, community meetings. I've already spoken, I had already had a gathering at my church a few years ago, but I've spoken to my pastor again, and there's a nearby synagogue and Fort Collegiate Church. And I thought that I would speak to them about hosting meetings in the fall, and I certainly would have one, and I have a few friends who are not in Manhattan itself whom I have spoken to. So I think that if we could gather people and have speakers at those, and at the same time as we educate those people about the New York Health Act, encourage them then to send it to their legislators, or if their legislators have in fact, hopefully by then signed it, really applaud their stance for doing so. The follow-up, I feel, and Ting and I discussed this briefly, but I feel like the follow-up should be very short. Uh, we're all so, I mean, I'm dyslexic, so I'm a very slow reader, but we're all, our inboxes are so inundated. So I have kind of been playing with a little bit of language, and Ting and I will talk about that tomorrow, but about how the follow-up could be a real call to action. Just, it's like enough explaining, right, to these people. I mean, I was curious, by the way, when I went online to because if I've told people to look up the New York Health Act, and I wonder if there's some way we can change our website. So rather than saying the campaign for, if there's some way to get the New York Health Act, but at any rate, the only thing that popped up for me was Robert Jackson's page. Have you all seen that? I guess you have, huh? I was so impressed. Yeah, it's just terrific. And I don't know how much, again, since I'm a new member, how much support and accolades he has already received from us, um, for taking that bold stand. And it's just a wonderful page. Um, and that he could be an example even when I don't know, and you all would know better certainly than I, but if in doing a follow-up saying, we so appreciate what Robert Jackson has done, we would like you to do the same thing. We would like you to put the pledge on your website. So I think that kind of covers where I am.
Thanks, Rebecca. You're right. I mean, Jackson has been a real champion on this issue, and a leader that others can emulate, and hopefully more will. And you also make great points, I think, about the multi-purpose nature of the pledge. I mean, it is a lobbying tool. It is a campaigning tool. It's an organizing tool, but it's an educational tool as well. It works on so many different levels. And I found it over the years, we've done a number of these in the past to be, yeah, incredibly effective. And then finally, as something, for these legislators to live up to, I can think of at least a couple instances where an elected a candidate at the time signed on to the pledge and then got elected and then didn't follow through, at least immediately, on their pledge, and we really beat them up over it. We're like, hey, you signed this pledge. We made a big public stink about it, and then they, came kicking and screaming onto the bill. That's not the ideal circumstance, but if need be, it functions in that way too. Um, I see that we're joined tonight by also Melanie, the executive director of Campaign for New York Health. Melanie, do you have anything to add to how a pledge like this can work and how you would hope for it to work in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I certainly like hear you know, all of the great thoughts around persuading legislators. And it is a complex beast, right? It is not you know, the old cartoon, I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill, or, you know, in this case, Albany. You know, it's just that's not the way Albany works, right? It is just a multi-layered kind of process that is not really visible to folks who aren't kind of in the mix, right? So I think for me, when I think about a pledge for candidates and for you know, for the ultimate, whoever ends up, you know, becoming whoever runs in November, because I think, you know, we've got the primary and then we've got the November election. I think the biggest tool for us, as you know, certainly the campaign, NIPAN, these statewide and grassroots organizations, is to use it as a vehicle to educate during the campaigning process, right? To bring people in. Look, this candidate signed this pledge, and we've been there, we've done that, you know, over many, many years. And I think Jeff, you know, pointed it out, you know, quite well. Thing things change, right? And when they get to Albany, things get harder. They don't get easier, right? As much as candidates will like to tell us now, oh, I just have to be careful now, and then when I get there, I'll do it. It gets much, much harder once they get elected, right? So I think for us, it's almost, at least in my mind, the biggest benefit for our campaign for the New York Health Act is that we can use it as a real tool to bring in voters and normalize it in certain districts, right? Because, you know, look, we still hear you know, oh, well, that's kind of radical, right? Even though we all know we're the only country in the whole developed world that does not have single payer or some type of universal healthcare system. So I think about it more as an opportunity for us to bring people in and strengthen our ranks. Those people then in turn can help us hold these electeds accountable. But I think we shouldn't put all of our eggs in the basket of you know, that it will hold these electeds accountable, because unfortunately it should work like that. But, you know, more times than we'd like to count, it doesn't. But I do think there's a tremendous benefit to using it as an organizing tool and an education tool and bringing folks in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Melanie. Anyone have anything to add to that, or any questions about the pledge and how it's going to be used? Ting, and then Judy.
Everybody on this call probably got our follow-up asking them to get in touch with their legislators. If you didn't, leave a message in the chat so I can figure out why you didn't get it. But we're going to send another set out to the legislators tomorrow, and there will be a follow-up to you a day or two after that. And, well, not just you, but lots of people, actually. So really the request is that when you get that, do follow up. Whether your legislator's already on the bill, never heard of the bill, or somewhere in between, it's really worth either giving them kudos or a kick in the ass, whatever seems to be appropriate.
And follow up on the pledge, Ting, or follow up on IC?
Oh, well, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say it often takes a lot of follow-up with these folks. I mean, partly sometimes for legitimate reasons. They're busy. There's a lot that comes across their desk. Maybe it doesn't show up on their radar. It might take 2, 3, 4, 5 tries before you get their attention and get them to sign on if they're willing to. So that follow-up is super important. And another one thing I'll add to that is, you want to be polite about it. You're trying to convince them, not browbeat them into doing it. And so it's good to be, I think in this case anyway, diplomatic. At a later stage, if they sign on and then they start backtracking, maybe you get a little bit more hard-edged about it. But at this stage, it's definitely one of the ways that the campaign reaches out to and gets more familiar with candidates. And really, the ideal is to pull them into the fold and make them true champions on the bill. And it can be a great tool for accomplishing that. Any other, Judy, I think you were next.
I'm sorry, do we have a list of the co-sponsors?
Yeah, it's on the website with the bills.
It's,
Both
you can
houses.
look at if you look up the bill, it's all listed on the
Thank
New
you.
York State Senate or New York NYS Senate and Assembly.
Thanks.
My thing was just, it's probably a distraction, but it was at Shelley Mayer's town hall on the New York Health Act. A woman got up at the end when there was a Q&A and described her circumstances. She's just the kind of person who needs the New York Health Act. And I was kind of horrified to hear her then say, but isn't it socialism? And then we had to go. Shelley handled it very well. She talked about the fire department socialism. But apparently that, I assume she's representative of others who have this terror of socialism that's keeping them from supporting it.
Yeah, and it's a great point, Judy. I've certainly come across that as well. I don't personally have any problem with socialism. It seems like a much better system than the one we have. But if you get that, you could point out, it is not socialized medicine. Socialized medicine is something that radical communist country, Great Britain has, right? So they have socialized medicine where most of the doctors and most of the hospitals are employed, they're part of the government, right? They're employed by the government. Whereas what we're proposing with the New York Health Act is not to privatize healthcare overall, but to pay for it with public funds, rather than the way that we do it, which is, as Melanie pointed out earlier, a uniquely stupid way to do it, which is to pass all of these public and private funds through private insurance companies who just siphon off massive amounts of the money and leave very little for care. Melanie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say, to your point, that is not a new line, right? Isn't it socialism, right? This has been going on for a while. There are a lot of very well-funded think tanks that are funded by our opposition that, their job is to come up with ways to scare people and make people stay away from this. What I have found to be a useful tactic when that question comes up is to ask them, well, what do you think socialism is? And I don't think I've ever come across someone that was actually able to explain what socialism is. And like the point is not to make them feel terrible, but it's sort of to disarm them in the moment, and then you can explain what it is. And I find that it really fosters good conversation, if that's helpful. I just wanted to mention that.
I remember Shelley handled it very well. I think she probably did explain. She didn't do that, but she did explain that the difference between socialized medicine and this, if I remember correctly. But that's very helpful. Thank you, Melanie.
Excellent. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this conversation now. We have time at the end, we can come back to it. But we're being joined tonight by Mark Hannay, who's going to help explain what happened this session in Albany on healthcare. We didn't get the New York Health Act passed, unfortunately, but there was there were a lot of positive developments and a lot of the maybe backstory Mark can share with us as well as to what happened this session on healthcare. Mark, thanks so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. And hello, I see many familiar faces here. So, and for those who are not familiar, it's nice to meet you, albeit virtually, and hopefully sooner rather than later, it can be in person. For those who don't know me, I'm Mark Hannay. I'm director of Metro New York Healthcare for All, which is a coalition of community groups and labor unions here in New York City that work on healthcare advocacy issues. We've been around over 30 years now. And our core mission is universal healthcare, but we also work on other things issues and campaigns that we believe to be strategic, advancing that toward that goal or laying foundations for that goal. I'm trying to think of, I wear a bunch of hats too. I am the co-chair of the steering committee of Healthcare for All New York, which is a broad coalition that focuses on healthcare issues in Albany. Let's see, I coordinate the Healthcare for America Now campaign here across New York State, which is a national umbrella coalition that came together in the late 2000s to help push comprehensive healthcare reform through Congress that we now know as the Affordable Care Act, and has worked on its implementation and defense. And since then, we've worked on the No Surprises Act in Congress, and more recently, the Build Back Better that morphed into Inflation Reduction Act that took on the pharmaceutical industry finally. And then I do a bunch of advocacy work around hospital oversight and regulation here in New York. And a subset of that work, I've been leading a campaign here in Lower Manhattan where I live to try to keep our last community hospital open and operating, Beth Israel Medical Center. So there are a number of activities that I'm up to, but I've been asked to come and talk about what happened this year in Albany. The state legislative session just ended this past weekend. As you all know, there's sort of two chunks to the legislative session. There's the budget session, which is sort of the first half, which deals with a lot of money related stuff. And then there's what we call rest of session, which is sort of all the non-budget, more policy oriented kinds of things. So I'll start with what got done in the budget that I have some familiarity with, and there's always a plethora of issues that are wrapped up in the budget around healthcare and other things. What I don't talk about, others I'm sure can talk about. I see Julia here, so I know she can talk about the Fair Pay for Home Care campaign and what happened there. But at any rate, what did get through is a package of bills related to kind of curbing medical debt, particularly hospital medical debt. It's called the Ounce of Prevention Act. It was sort of the culmination of a whole lot of individual proposals that have been floated over the years around hospital financial assistance and so forth. And they finally got put back into one package last year, and then we actually got it done this year. To really update and improve and expand eligibility for and the benefits patients receive when they access hospital financial assistance programs. In the late 2000s, finally, again, after a very long 15-year campaign, New York enacted legislation that requires all hospitals to have financial assistance programs for low and moderate income people to help them afford hospital care, usually through discounts and so forth. And it was written prior to and enacted prior to the Affordable Care Act, and there's been so much change that's come in under that we really needed to update and improve it. And so that was one piece of legislation that got through. And so the top lines from that is that there will no longer be an asset test for people to qualify for a hospital financial assistance program. There's going to be one uniform form that every hospital uses rather than each one makes up their own and asks about this, that, and the other thing. There's one standard that every hospital uses in one form. There will be also no test around immigration status issues. So that's a good thing. There will be free hospital care for people up to 200% of the federal poverty level. That pretty much mirrors what's already in place, because most people up to 200% of the poverty level will either qualify for Medicaid or the essential plan, in which case they have free hospital care anyway. So it sort of just conforms the existing hospital financial assistance program to that. For people between 200 and 400% of the federal poverty level, they'll be getting significant discounts that will be pegged to the Medicaid rate as opposed to the commercial market rate. And that's a sliding scale. The more income you get between 200 and 400, the lower the discount you'll get. in terms of any medical debt that you might, hospital medical debt you might incur, in terms of paying it back, you would only be obligated up to 5% of your income per year. So you couldn't be forced to pay more than that until you pay it off. Hospitals will not be allowed to sue patients for medical debt up to the 400% of the federal poverty level, which for an individual now is probably a little over $60,000 a year. So that's the Onset Prevention Act that got done. The other thing that got done, a couple other things in the budget. One is that all kids under the age of 6, once they qualify or get on Medicaid for whatever reason, given their family's financial circumstances, they will stay on Medicaid up through age 6. No recertification, no whatever, your kid gets Medicaid. And so that's a good thing. And the fair pay for home care, again, unfortunately, I was not included in this year's budget, and others can speak more to that. And then another thing that got enacted in the budget was there are no longer going to be out-of-pocket costs for patients with diabetes diagnosis for either insulin or supplies. So you'll pay for that for your insurance premium, but you won't have any copays or deductibles anymore when you go to pick up those products. So that's what got done in the budget. Then there were a couple things, some things that happened since in the second half of session. The most notable one is the Local Input for a Community Healthcare Act got passed. Again, it's a bill that's kicking around in the legislature for over a decade now. It will sort of formalize what has kind of been an ad hoc system of the State Department of Health considering proposals to close hospitals. It brings the Department of Health and regulators into that process much earlier. It lays out a 9-month process. This step, this step, this step. It brings the community input into the process much earlier than exists now, so that they can have a role in that. It doesn't say whether the department should, thumbs up, thumbs down on a closure, but it really does all this stuff that's been sorely needed. It's been kind of catch as catch can over the many years. Unfortunately, the coverage for all proposal to cover all immigrants, low-income immigrants, I should say, under the essential plan was not successful this year. It did pass the Senate again this year, second year in a row, and it never got taken to the floor by Assembly leadership again for the second year in a row, despite the fact that there are the votes there to pass it should it go to the floor. And basically our advocates' assessment around that proposal is that the speaker is trying to protect the governor politically, particularly in an election year, and doesn't want to rile up the whole immigration issue this year, particularly given the congressional races that the Democrats are trying to flip, so that the House flips and Hakeem Jeffries becomes the new Speaker of the House. And then the other bill that didn't get enacted, but apparently came very close, and it's not something I've worked on, but it's gotten significant media attention, has been the medical aid in dying legislation, which would allow for and not even really physician-assisted suicides. It's more patient self-administered and so forth. And I'm not familiar with the ins and outs of the bill, but apparently there's a lot of kind of procedures enough so that somebody can't impulsively sort of make this decision to end their lives. And it's for people who I think are dealing with and facing terminal illness primarily. So those are the things I guess I can report out. Others may have other things, or happy to answer questions or listen to people's comments.
Thank you so much, Mark. And yes, looks like we got a couple hands up already, Judy, and then Ting, and I have a couple of questions as well.
I wanted to know with the Community Healthcare Act,
Uh-huh.
can you give me a bill number for that so I can read more about it?
The hospital closure bill?
The local input for
Community
community.
Healthcare Act, yes. The Senate number is 8843A.
8843A.
And the Assembly bill is 1633B as in boy.
Okay. I did just want to say, we had a sort of a town hall on the Medical Aid in Dying Act, CD 16 indivisible. And there's, some people think there are too many safeguards in it. It's they've modified it to be only terminal. You have to have a certain life expectancy, a bunch of sign-offs by multiple doctors and so on. So they've worked very hard on trying to make it palatable.
Right. One other bill I just remembered I forgot to mention is the Stop SUNY Suing bill. And that's a bill that would ban public hospitals operated by the state university system. There are 5 of them across New York State. Stony Brook, downstate in central Brooklyn, upstate in Syracuse, Roswell Park, which is a cancer specialty hospital in Buffalo. And the 5th one is a long-term care facility in the Hudson Valley, whose name I don't remember. But anyway, what's happened as part of this whole movement around medical debt nationally and here in New York over recent years is we've really either legally by law or by regulation or by literal just shaming and local press stopped most hospitals from suing their patients for unpaid medical bills. You can still send them to collections and all that. And so most of them have stopped. The only ones who are really still suing are the SUNY hospitals, and they are public hospitals. And the reason for that is an old Pataki era regulation that requires that SUNY facilities do this. So potentially a governor could change the regulation, but they've been trying to change it by statute. This year was sort of the one piece of the Ounce of Prevention Act that didn't get done in the budget. So it got spun off as its own little bill called Stop SUNY Suing. And it did pass the Senate, but again, didn't make it to a floor vote in the Assembly. So that's the other piece of legislation.
Thanks, Mark. I think Ting's hand was up, and then I have a
quick
question.
question.
No, actually, I want to go Ting and then Jean, and then I'll go.
Okay.
Quick question on the hospital closure bill. Does that prevent Beth Israel from doing this sort of incremental clawing piece by piece out that runs under the radar currently?
Yes, there is a provision that looks at things 1 year plus then a second year plus a third year. So I think it sort of has a 3-year window where you can accumulate things, and if yeah, I don't remember the particulars around that. It was something that came to the fore in the final revision of the bill, and I don't remember the particulars, but something like that. Yeah. So it attempts to get at that, and over a 3-year period, if more than 35% of a given service, step by step, up to 35% is removed from a facility, then they're required to go through the whole certificate of need process.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
I just used a technical term there. Let me define certificate of need. It's the way hospitals, if they want to make major changes in the services or whatever in their local communities, they have to submit what's called a certificate of need proposal to the Department of Health. If it's, fairly low level and modest in scope and inexpensive and a bit of a no-brainer, then the department itself just handles it. Anything major has to go through a multi-stakeholder body called the Public Health and Health Planning Council that vets and makes recommendations on any given proposal. And it also triggers a new provision in state law recently in the last couple of years, what's called the health equity impact assessment. Like what's the impact on health equity impact on a local community of a major change, like a removal of service, a closure of an emergency room, or this or that, or a closure of a whole facility. So now all of that will go through the certificate of need process, and all of that will go before this council, which hasn't been the case previously.
Thanks, Mark. Gene.
Yeah, I do have a question, but I just want to make a comment on that socialism thing. I think you could also say something like, if you've got 10 socialists together, you'll get at least 15 or 20 definitions of what socialism is. Socialists fight over it. It's kind of a word that's lost meaning because it has so many meanings and it's used as a boogeyman phrase. But if you're looking at the English system as an example of socialism, we have an example of that here in the United States, and nobody's hair is catching on fire over it. That would be the Veterans Association, which is run by the government. But here's my question. The Bronx is the poorest county in New York State, short of passing the New York Health Act. What would be the most important thing that we could get passed or to help the Bronx, which would have the most benefit?
I would say the coverage for all proposal to cover all low-income immigrants through the state's essential plan, which would cover them up to 250% of the federal poverty level. So that would be about $30,000. No, maybe more than that. Yeah, about $38,000 a year for an individual would qualify. It's free coverage, but no premium, no deductible, no copays, kind of thing. So that would drop the uninsurance rate down significantly, particularly in a county like the Bronx, where uninsurance rate is higher than because it's such a low income area, and there are many not properly documented, let me put it that way, immigrants living there. They have some documentation of some sort oftentimes, but it doesn't qualify them for whatever kind of thing, or they may not have any documentation at all. And just as an aside thing, all of these new arrivals, the migrants that have come in the last 2 years, once they file an asylum claim, until that claim is fully adjudicated, they all qualify for Medicaid. So they're not part of the mix.
Great. Mark, I have kind of an outside of the box question for you, if you're willing to take it.
Go ahead.
So you've had an inside look at the sausage making in Albany for a long, long time, on healthcare especially. Seen the ins and outs, and you've been also working on the New York Health Act for years and years.
Yeah.
As somebody who has also worked on the New York Health Act for many years, many of the people on the call have been hammering away at this for a long, long time. We keep coming up short. But in the meantime, a lot has happened, as you just explained. Even this year, a lot happened on the healthcare front. So I guess broadly speaking, my question is, what would you say is the relationship between those two efforts, the efforts on these smaller, more incremental bills, and the big kahuna, solving not all, but almost all of these problems at once by passing the New York Health Act? And I'll just lead into that question by saying that as somebody who has worked on this for a long time and been disappointed year after year when it doesn't pass. One thing that I don't know if I've convinced myself or thought, it's occurred to me over that time, maybe it's wishful thinking, but is to say that there is a relationship, and that some of these bills, or maybe even a lot of them, would not have passed had there not been a broad effort on the state level to pass truly universal health care. If for no other reason than that the campaign has brought it to the forefront of people's minds, or at least some people's minds, or many legislators anyway, normalized the concept to some extent. But also, maybe slightly more cynically, it's all these other bills are things that they can pass so that they don't have to pass the New York Health Act, the big one, that would really threaten the insurance industry. Does that accord at all, or do you have a perspective on that, that would shed light on the relationship between these bigger bills, or the big bill, and these smaller bills?
Let me say all of the above.
Yeah.
I was remiss in my bona fides, rattling off my bona fides earlier. I have been on the steering committee and leadership team of the Campaign for New York Health since it was launched, probably almost a decade ago. Also been part of that fight too. It's always a balance in my experience. And it's never either or, it's both and. I always try to use these kind of more smaller bore, shorter term incremental things as ways to step toward, lay groundwork toward the big thing, while at the same time, of course, pushing for the big thing, because if and when the big thing finally happens, it's probably going to be as much a factor of the political moment has finally arrived, as opposed to, the window is the proverbial, what is it? Oh, what's the term? Overton window? Is that something like that? Arrives, and, it's oftentimes not open all that long. So you have to sort of be ready to roll. And the thing is, so what you're trying to do is get as many of your ducks lined up and foundation laid so you're ready to go at that point. And so that's kind of the way I sort of look at it. Like, for instance, with the Coverage for All proposal, if we can get that through, not only will it help, a fair number of lower income immigrants who don't have proper documentation, but it's kind of going to take that whole philosophical discussion of providing coverage for immigrants sort of off the table. It will be settled law in New York. We won't have to argue about it anymore. So that then when the New York Health Act comes to the fore, there's a political moment, we're ready to roll. We don't have a huge kind of anti-immigrant animus backlash coming at us because it's done. One of the things I noticed, when we worked on the ACA, when was that? 14 years ago now, and then finally got it through there. When it came down to the end, as modest as that bill is in scope, the two things that almost derailed it at the very end were coverage for immigrants and coverage of abortion. Those are they were the two seminal hot button issues on the political right. And so here in New York, we have settled, particularly in the wake of the Dobbs decision of a couple of years ago from the Supreme Court, we have, protected fairly well women's rights to abortion care. We got the Equal Rights Amendment on the ballot coming up this fall that will help solidify that too. And now if we could do something for immigrants, we'll be doing good too. So it's and the thing about the Coverage for All proposal I mentioned earlier, I just want to make sure everybody knows this. This is all federal money. It's no state money. All we have to do is ask the federal government for permission to use the federal money that's coming into New York State, that we want to use it to cover all low-income immigrants. So even there, it's not costing New York taxpayers not one single dime. So if we can kind of get that established, I think it'll go a long way. That's kind of the step-by-step, create the political pressure. Because I think, for many people, not all, we had this discussion earlier about socialism. I'm not sure I'd go down that rabbit hole anyway, but I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay. You'll come back to it. Thank you, Mark. That's great. I appreciate it. And you're right. And you make I wasn't thinking of it in those terms, but you're right. I'm talking about how like the broader push for universal healthcare sort of normalizes some of the concepts that get used to pass something like these expansions and to the essential plan, to Medicaid, hopefully to coverage for all. But it works in the other direction too. You pass those smaller bills.
Oh yeah.
Settled law, and it normalizes the concept so that when we get to the New York Health Act, it's already just the way we think about healthcare. It's a great point.
And we sort of got the building blocks in place, so then it becomes kind of like a non-controversial no-brainer. Okay, we're just going to reorganize it this way and that way because we've already got most of the elements already in place and we're using them and they work. So let's just do it and we'll call it New York Health.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. I see Donald's hand up and I think I saw Ting's as well.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much. This is very revealing. And it shows all the threads that are out there. It feels like you're the clearinghouse for all of this. You're the one who knows which of the 10 stones that are being pushed up the hill, what's ahead of one, what's in front, what's behind. My question is the dependency. Are there interdependencies in these bills that the bills may have been developed independently, but are they in risk at stepping on one another's toes as they get passed?
Well, yeah, as you write and craft legislation and they get amended as you go along in a campaign, you always, at the very least, want to make sure you're not stepping on someone else's toes or creating unforeseen adverse consequences.
Yeah.
And ideally, you want to try to structure synergy between them as you go. And you have to be in communication. I mean, part of the reason to you, I appear to know a lot of things, I've been doing this for 30 plus years. So, it just sort of accumulates, but also you work on this issue and you learn that and you work on that issue and you begin to see kind of like how they fit together or could fit together or should fit together better, kind of thing.
Sounds like you're the one man in the state that has that knowledge.
Well, I'm not the only one for sure. There are others, but I'm one of them. Let's put it that way.
Thank you for that.
I always tell people I don't know a lot of stuff, but I generally know who does know if I don't know. So
That's important. Right. Thank you.
if you can't work on everything, you burn yourself out. So that's
Right.
the other thing. Like we all have to kind of take on these pieces and once we're kind of communicating and aware and supporting each other, then okay, you're doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. It all fits together in a bigger whole, that kind of approach.
Got it. Got it.
That is one strength of the campaign. We have all of those overlapping competencies
Right.
and so many passionate people. Ting, I saw your hand up as well.
Yeah, quick question, a little bit in the weeds, Mark, but the money, the federal money you mentioned with the coverage for all, I think, that be a waiver process, in which case?
Well, the waiver's already been approved. So it's just a matter of expanding its scope to include this group of people.
So it's an existing waiver, okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was just, yeah. Well, yeah, it was first done when we created the essential plan back in 2016, I think. And then just this year, the eligibility levels and stuff for the essential plan went up higher to 250% of the poverty level now and brought some new folks in. The DACA recipients and so forth are now in the program. So, it's just a matter of the money's there. Can we use it to pay for this? And the federal government has indicated back to us in concept, yes, we would have no problem with it. Now, this is the Biden administration. Like, should there be a change in presidency, like all bets are off.
Right.
But, and that was part of the argument we're trying to make to the legislature and the governor this year. Like, look, we don't know how this fall's election is going to turn out. Go for this money now, grab it, lock it in, and let's get it done. But they, they didn't bite.
So the question was because of waivers being required for the Health Act, which are often brought up as an impediment to getting it.
Right. Yeah.
Does this make that any more likely in any incremental way?
In a sense that, the money is now flowing into New York. Unless somebody turns off that spigot, the money's going to be there. So then it's a matter of, can we purpose the money this way instead of that money, along with the Medicaid money and the CHIP money and this money, and we put some of our own money on the table, and that's how we pay for New York Health.
Thanks, Mark. Any other questions for Mark before we let him go? And thanks for everyone's questions. Yeah, Rebecca.
Mark, I am wondering what I'm hearing at this, and I knew, so we haven't met before, but I really enjoyed what you had to say. So much of what you said seemed to be like behind closed door is the wrong phrase, but kind of insider types of maneuverings.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how important, because I've been under, and perhaps somewhat of a misconception, that it was really, really, really important for us to get the word out to constituents about the New York Health Act so that they're writing in.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I'm sure both are important, but would you say that really the engine that drives this is more the people inside the campaign itself?
You need both. You have to have both. You have to have an inside game and an outside game, and they both support each other. Kind of thing. Like around this medical debt stuff, there was a whole grassroots campaign, and the Stop Suing bill. There's a whole grassroots campaigns in and around Syracuse, in and around Buffalo, that have created the pressure behind that. So that, yeah, people are working inside the legislature thing, getting it through the committee, getting onto the floor calendar, all that stuff. And that, you need folks kind of there making sure that happens. But at the same time, what's the energy driving that is from the the grassroots folks out in the real world, shall we say. And people sharing their own stories. I can't tell you how many issue campaigns I've worked on where sharing your story is such a crucial piece of the campaign, because it makes an issue real for the legislator, for the media, for the community. It's not an abstract concept at that point. And people sharing their stories about just general medical debt and being sued and etc. You also have to do your homework, make sure you understand the issues and sort of zooming out. Like there was the Community Service Society, which has a whole policy shop. They did a whole bunch of reports and studies of analysis of what was actually happening around medical debt across New York. Where were the hot spots? What communities? Who were the patients? What were their income levels? All that kind of stuff, which really helped make the case from a policy standpoint. But, that only gets you so far. If you don't have the people sharing their stories, that's what makes it real for people.
Thank you.
And I guess since we've talked a lot about New York Health, I would invite Melanie if she wants to chime in here, because she's got a lot of good strategic thinking too, to add to the conversation.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to run up. I know it's getting late, but what you said, Mark, that one word, both, is so critical, because yes, one does not work without the other. We need the grassroots, and I think when we get to that critical mass, it really will be from an outsized push from the grassroots. Rebecca, what you shared earlier is not something I think unique to any of us. We've all gone to different areas or even within our own communities and talked about the New York Health Act, and even people who were adamant Medicare for all supporters, they don't know about the New York Health Act, right? So it's so important that, you know, that we continue to do that on the outside as we work that inside game as well. And then it's not even just the legislators. There are other stakeholders in this picture as well that we're also working on, right? There's lots of different verticals that, you know, as a campaign, we are actively working on, but truly, look, the legislature is not going to do anything without pressure. They're just not. Otherwise, they would have done it, right? So it is critical, critical, critical that we get our people, you know, visible and vocal, and not, you know, it doesn't have to be oppositional, at least not yet, right? But we do need to get people active in the fight. And one of the things that we've been working on in the campaign is like, yes, there is overarching messaging, right? We want everybody to understand a certain amount of like kind of talking points, if you will, or facts about the New York Health Act. But we're working on regional approaches as well, right? Because every region is a little bit different. And for some regions, hospital closures are a major, major issue. And for other regions, property taxes are huge. And so as we sort of thread this needle together and find those sort of push points that light people up, that get people animated, that's what we're trying to do and bring them into the campaign. So it's not easy, you know, it's a big, big job. And, you know, as Mark said, he's been working on this at least 10 years, right, Mark? At least, I think, right?
Yeah. Oh, well,
And,
the New York Health Act goes back to my very early days.
well, the 90s. Yeah. So there's folks working on it even longer, right? And I think it's been a culmination of all this little work over these decades, right? That has led us to this moment, right? And there's a lot we've learned, and now we're trying to take that knowledge and strategically move forward as best we can. And you know, it's not just what are the right moves, but there's all these things that we kind of have to work on, right? Like we know intuitively, we all know once we get close, our opposition's going to come with crazy misinformation and disinformation campaigns, right? So we really are working on trying to diversify our funding and making sure we're really building up enough funds to run the kind of campaigns we need, not just for education, but to be ready for that fight, right? Because the reality is, and it's the truth that we don't want to say out loud, but it's the truth nonetheless. People don't want to fund us because we're just the people, you know, nobody's making any money by us winning, right? I mean, we are as people, but you know, the big industry that has the dollars to put behind it, like they don't want us to win, right? So, you know, in certain respects, like I go back to, like, it will be the grassroots that win this campaign as we work on all the other pieces. So I hope that made sense.
Thank you. Yes. Thank
Yeah,
you.
there's an old slogan from the 60s and 70s that says, think global and act local. You know, keep your eye on the prize, but work in your community and region and so forth, because, you know, and then everybody doing that in their own arenas. And as long as we're all connected and working together and coordinating, then we move forward.
I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Thank you, Mark, so much for sharing all that. Thank you, Melanie, for joining and sharing, and all the great questions tonight. Great conversation. Ting, do we have any housekeeping notes that need to be wrapped up?
Not particularly, but look for an email in the next couple of days about how to follow up about the pledge with your legislators and candidates, and do it.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Thank
Awesome.
you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming, Mark. And great to see you all. We'll see you all soon. Take care.